Well, you're here looking at Finnebago 2, and the reason it's Finnebago 2 is because the other Finnebago that I built had round logs on it, and this one has dovetail corners and square logs, hand-hewn log kind of look to it, and that's probably going to be a good lead-in to what we're talking about today, and that's log construction, Finnish log construction, and how it was done. This represents logs that have been hewn off on the side, and then the corners, they're done with a double dovetail. It's called a double dovetail because it goes in both directions, and these are like 10 degrees, and they're made to fit together. Now the inside of it is my camper, and it's my home away from home. It's all cedar. Most of the construction is cedar because it's lighter and it reduces the weight on this thing. So that's what I've used in building this. Today we're going to talk about Finnish log construction. And so we're going to start today with a couple of tools that are important to the process. The first of these is the broad axe. This is very often related to any kind of squaring and log, making logs for houses and whatever. And this is what the Finns used. They used a broad axe. A broad axe gets its name because it's rather broad, it's rather wide. And a broad axe has only one use, and that is to hew logs. You don't use it to chop trees down, do anything else with it. You just hew logs with it. A broad axe is sharpened on one edge, on one side, not both sides. Because as you're using the axe, you're going to want it tight up against the log. So that's the flat side will go against the log. Sometimes people talk about a left-handed or a right-handed broad axe. There really is no such thing, because a broad axe is made so if you wanted this on the other side, then you would simply pull the handle out and insert the handle in from the other direction. And that's how you would go from a right-handed to a left-handed broad axe. And these are what they square the logs with, and we'll talk more about that obviously when we look at logs. Okay, the other tool that I want to talk about is what I like to call the secret weapon of the Finns. This is a vara. That's the Finnish word for scribe. And this is used to scribe between two logs so they can be closely fitted. And we will talk more about that when we're looking at logs. But I wanted you to see these are individually made, usually by the local blacksmith or by the user himself. The one that I'm holding was made by my father. He was a Finnish log and a builder, Finnish log builder and a house builder. So these are the two very important tools when we're doing Finnish log construction. Okay, the first cabin that we're going to talk about today is the pine cabin, and it's here on the site of the Finnish Heritage Center in Finland, Minnesota, which doesn't get more Finnish in America than Finland, Minnesota. And this cabin is a hand-hewn Finnish log cabin. And as we talked about in there, we use the broad axe to hew the sides of these logs so that they're squared. Now, they square it for two reasons. Number one, it will shed the rain. And so the rain and the rot of the log that you get in the round log construction, we don't have here. The second reason is everyone knows about heartwood. That's the best part of the tree. So when you remove the outer layers of this tree, you're down to the heartwood. So you're to the more durable part of the log. So those are the two reasons that they squared the log. Now, the other thing that we talked about in there is this scribe. Because as they stacked these logs together, they would take the scribe and you would lay this log over the top of the one that it's going to be with, and you would scribe the profile of the bottom log onto the upper log. This log is left natural. It's curved at the top. But you take this log and you concave the underneath of this log, and you follow that line that you made with this scribe, so that when you set this log on top of this log, it goes down tightly. Now, the Finns, the reason they did this is because they did not want to use chinking between the logs, because chinking will always fail. You've got chinking made out of mud, clay, whatever. It's a hard surface. Logs are breathing. And so eventually that chinking would fall out. And the Finns and the other Nordics, but this is pretty much done only by the Nordics, is they fit the logs together so they eliminate the need to have chinking. Now, you'll notice a little chinking that's been added to these logs now. That was done later. It really ought not to be there because it's not authentic to have chinking between the logs. However, what they did between the logs, as they put them together, they used moss, or if there was not a wet area, this area probably had lots of moss in it, they would take a layer of moss and lay it between the logs. Or if they didn't have it, they'd use grass, and then they'd press that down, compress that with the log as you set it on there. And that would stop any infiltration of air through the logs. So you had a very, very tight fit. One log is fitted to the other. And this is what signifies Finnish log construction. Other ethnic groups, many, many ethnic groups, built log cabins. They built log houses all over America. However, it was only the Nordics that took the time and had the skill. This is a learned skill. You don't just walk out and do it. Had the skill to take this log, scribe it, and then use their axe and concave it so that this fit down on top of this log, giving you that tight fit. Now, after you have your logs so that they fit together, then the next process that you do is you have to build a corner. And there are various kinds of corners. What we're seeing here on the pine cabin is what we call dovetail corners. And they're not just dovetails, they're double dovetails. They go in both directions, this way and this way. And it's about a 10 degree, but there's nothing really precise about it. When this log is being fitted on this log, this one already has the angle, so then they use their scribe and they make this log dovetail fit this one, and they work their way up. Now, the reason for the double dovetail is that is basically immovable. There's no way, for instance, if I wanted to work on this log, that I could pull this log out, because it's tightly held by this double dovetail of all of these corners. The only way I could get to this log is literally remove the logs from on top of it and then pull it off. These cabins have no metal fasteners in them. Now, what they would do is they would come in every so many feet, and they would put a wooden peg, about mostly 2-inch, 1.5 2 inch wood peg. As they worked their way up, it would go from this log to this log. They would drill a hole with their hand auger right down through this log and into this log, and then they would drive that peg in there. And then after they set the next one, they would drill and drive the next peg in there. And that's how they held them together. And that's what keeps these logs straight up and down. If you don't do that, now these logs are put up here when they're green. Because when you're hewing logs, you don't want to try to hew a dry log. It'll take the sharp right out of your axe, and it'll take the wind right out of your sail. Okay, it's very, very hard to do. Green logs are quite easy to square up. And so they use green logs. And of course, green logs are then going to dry. So you have to make sure they're held in place very tightly by the dovetail corner and then by the pegs that you've placed between each of these logs so that they won't have that tendency to warp or twist or move one way or another from one log to the other. Now, we've stepped inside of one of the other buildings that's here on the site. This is the log sauna. And I wanted us to take a look at the logs from the interior because they are unaltered here. And I want to point out a couple of things. You saw out there on that other building that they had added some chinking between the logs. This is the way they would look originally from both interior and exterior. There would be no chinking here because of that technique that I spoke about in tightly fitting the logs. However, I did mention that they would place either moss or grass between the logs. And if you look carefully here, you will see some of that moss right there. There's a little of that moss showing, and that was what was placed between the logs. It's like today if you would take insulation, some fiberglass insulation, and place that between the logs. This was their insulation between the logs that stopped the air infiltration. So what you're seeing here on these logs is what you would see originally on the outside. Okay, we're going to take a look at a little bit different style of Finnish log building. And this is made of round logs. This is one that they didn't use the broad axe and hew the logs square. Usually the old-timer Finns reserved round logs for hay barns and outside sheds and this kind of thing. When they had a building that was being heated or habitable, either way, they usually would do the hewing of the logs on the outside. Now, this building is more modern. And what's happened in Finnish and other log buildings, and I asked a Finnish log builder who was known in his younger days for being a very good hewer of logs. And he would put a string on a log and he'd hew right along that string. So I said, Bill, why today do you build round log houses instead of hewing your logs like the old Finns did? His answer was simple. Because people want them to look like log cabins. And so the transformation was to round logs. Now, the process that we talked about in using this vara, this scribe, is also used in this building because they scribed the logs so that they would closely fit together. I'm going to point out here, see this? This has been scribed and hewn out so it fits tightly against that one, etc., right on down. So it's the same principle of making these tightly fitted logs. And originally, this would have the same treatment between the logs. Because it's newer, it probably would have had new kind of insulation between the logs. But it wouldn't have been chinked, which they've done later on here. The danger that you get into with round logs, that it's kind of been forgotten along history, and so people have forgotten why did the Finns actually square them. You remember I told you earlier they squared them so that it would repel the rain. When you take a round log, now Everybody used to say the two things certain in the world were death and taxes. There's actually four things certain in the world. Death, taxes, chinking is going to fall out. And the other thing is, this is where Murphy's Law comes in. If you put a log up here, all logs will crack as they dry. That's the way logs are. And then Murphy comes along and says, I'm going to make that log crack at the top. You know, it doesn't have to, but it often does. Well, when it does, for instance, we'll take a look at just this log here. You have a crack here. Now, if this crack were a little bit further up, what would happen as the water would come down here off of this log, would go in here, go here, and then it would go right into that crack. And if you don't keep these cracks sealed, that log starts to rot from the inside. And you don't even know it until this log is so rotten you have to replace it. So that's the real danger that you get into. And that's one of the big reasons they avoided using round logs, and why they used the square ones, so that it would repel the moisture. Now, I'm not here to tell you you shouldn't have a round log house. But what I am here to tell you is if you do have a round log house, be sure that you keep these cracks sealed when they're up at the top like that. Because if you don't, your logs are going to rot. So that's what makes this cabin different than the ones we saw before, the earlier cabins, is this is made with round logs using that same Nordic principle of scribing and fitting the logs, but here they left the logs round.
Your beginning in life and how you got started doing all this reconstruction and working with logs.
Well, I grew up in a small Finnish community in central Idaho. Yes, there are Finns in Idaho. Most people don't know that, but yes, they are. And my father came from Finland, 1899, as an 18-year-old boy. Actually came to Minnesota first. He was in Ely for a couple of years before he moved on to Idaho because his older brother was there. And his older brother, they had opened up this area of Idaho for homesteading. And his older brother, Tom, wrote to my dad, Albin, and said, Albin, you better get to Idaho because if you don't hurry, there won't be any free land left. So my father moved on to Idaho, and he homesteaded 160 acres in 1905. On my maternal grandparents' side, my grandparents came from Finland about 1900, and as many Finns did, they had to go to work right away. And a lot of Finns worked in the mines. And my grandparents came with a lot of Finns to Wyoming and went to working in the mines in Wyoming. Well, eventually they and a number of other Finns heard about this free homesteading land up in Idaho in an area that looks a lot like Finland. And so they went up there and started claiming homesteads. And so there was a small Finnish community that grew up there. And that's where I grew up. I was born and I grew up in this Finnish community in central Idaho. As the years rolled by, I went to school in there, and I became interested in heritage and history. My family heritage, my Finnish heritage, history. And when I was in high school, I helped a small group of people set up a volunteer summer temporary museum in the old Boy Scout building, Community Hall building, for the summer because it was 1964, which was the Idaho Territorial Centennial. And as a couple of us talked at that time, wouldn't it be great to have a permanent museum up in Long Valley? That's what it was called. It's called the Long Valley. It's near McCall, Idaho. And so we discussed where should it be, and we decided that it should be in what used to be a town known as Roseberry, Idaho. And if you Google Roseberry, Idaho, you'll find out all about the museum. Because what happened was, when I finished high school, went to college, and then in the summers I was teaching school in Pennsylvania.
What did you go to college for?
I have a degree in history
Okay.
from Columbia University in New York. I went to New York. and then went to school and taught school, in Pennsylvania. And then began to spend the summers in Idaho. And the year I graduated from college, I bought the old general store, abandoned Roseberry General Store. And a couple of years later, a group of us formed the Long Valley Preservation Society, and we began moving buildings to this, had become a ghost town. They'd taken all the buildings from there because it had bypassed by the railroad. So it went mostly to agricultural lands. So we began to move some buildings back, and now if you pull up Roseberry, Idaho, you'll find there's 25 buildings there that we've moved in. Some are original, some are others that we moved to preserve them from being destroyed, including what we call the Heritage Center. And this is where we brought Finnish Log Buildings. And that's where I began to get involved with Finnish Log Construction. And I would work and restore and move these buildings. And I became very curious. I said, I wonder if the Finns built like this, because I realized that this was a different type of building. These fitted logs were not what you saw in most Idaho cabins in the woods, and we have lots of cabins in the woods. So I said, okay, I'm going to find out. I went to Finland. I've been there three times now, and yes, that's the way they build them in Finland. And then I said, when I retire, I'm going to spend my time going across country researching and documenting original Finnish log buildings. And that's what I've done for over 10 years now. And come to areas like this, Finland, Minnesota, and documented your Finnish buildings here, your Finnish log buildings, and worked with various groups in preservation of these buildings. And so this become my life's passion. My life's work is encouraging people to preserve them. Those that can't be preserved, at least I'm preserving them by documenting them. And then I lecture. I spend part of my summer also, as I travel, giving lectures. In 2018-19, I was Finlandia Foundation National Lecturer of the Year, and I went from one end of this country to the other end to Finnish communities to talk about Finnish log construction. Because it is unique, and it's something that we Finns can be very proud of. That's my background. I just wanted to mention this last year, I finished my master's in applied historical research, which most people don't do at 76 years old, but it was good. It'll help me in writing my books. I have written one book. It's called Finnish Log Construction, The Art. Although out of print, the book is available on CD, and I'm working on a second book about Finnish culture, Finnish sauna, and Finnish buildings.
Very cool.
Anyway, so that's what I do.